Hi, I'm Sheryl Belson with American Sewing Guild, and I just recently learned that November is Native American Heritage Month. Now, I wish I'd known this sooner because I would have loved to do a segment on this during the month of November, but we're doing it now, and I'm really excited about it. The time that we celebrate the rich and diverse cultures and traditions and histories of the Native American people, and we take a moment to acknowledge the important contributions they've made. Well, since I'd also recently met one of our newest members in the Plano chapter, Debbie Baker, and I had learned of her personal pursuit to learn to draft traditional clothing from her Choctaw heritage, I immediately wanted to connect with her and capture her story. So Debbie, thank you for joining me today. Welcome.
Halito and Yako Key. That is hello and thank you in Choctaw. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate the opportunity to share with you this journey that I've been on.
Well, we can't wait to hear about it. And, let's just dive right in. I'd love to hear a little bit about how your interest in learning to make authentic Native American apparel developed. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
I can. So as a separate people group, the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, we have about 220,000 tribal members. And it's really important that we maintain our culture, our heritage, our language, so that we continue to identify as that separate people group. It's very imperative that we continue to pass on all of those traditions and cultures to our fellow tribal members. So, and there's a lot of that goes along. There's our beading of jewelry, our traditional clothing, how we grow and prepare our heritage or heirloom foods, and most importantly is our language. So the journey started for me when I actually started working for the Choctaw Nation about 6 years ago. Every month, the first Monday of every month, we have what's called Heritage Day, where I see a lot of our tribal members dressed in our traditional clothing. They serve traditional foods. We do our social dancing. We are taught some of our crafts, and getting to participate in that every month started this deep yearning inside that I want to connect more with my tribe. Up until that point, I hadn't had an opportunity to. So I had actually commissioned an elder in our tribe to make this traditional shirt for me. And I'll just step back here so you can see it. I absolutely love it. When I step into it, I almost just feel like the spirit of my heritage, of my ancestors come to me. It's really, it's incredible to think that just an article of clothing can kind of bring that into you. And it really does. It brings it to you. So, I had commissioned a elder to make this shirt, and this shirt, and also one for my husband. So the men wear the traditional shirts also. And these shirts cost anywhere from $200 or $300 each, which you might think sounds like a lot. I should tell you, a whole dress costs $600 or more. And these are just the shirts. But as I explain to you the intricacies of what goes into making one of these, you'll be like, okay, I understand. So it can take quite a few hours to make them. And a lot of that has to do with the details that have been added to it. So after several months of wearing the shirt that had been commissioned, I really wanted to get to learn how to make my own. And there was one of our elders who was hosting a class. And the good thing is, at the time, I didn't know anything about sewing. I didn't know how to read a pattern. I didn't know how to use a machine. I grew up watching my mother and grandmother do these things, but I think just at some point around my teenage years, I veered off into another area. And so I didn't pick up those. Regrettably, I would love to have my grandmother back to sit next to her and sew every day. But so I had to learn from the very beginning, every little thing about sewing, the terminology, how to do it, the very basics. So what was really great about this class that the elder was hosting was she encouraged us to use a pattern so that I felt more comfortable, because these shirts or this clothing doesn't have traditional patterns. And I think we'll talk about that more a little bit later on. But she encouraged us to start where we could, which is good, because, you know, not having some of those skills, and then just embellish it with some of the Choctaw elements, which I'll talk about those later too, to kind of share with you what those mean. That's kind of where my journey began, was just experiencing it firsthand, wearing the clothing at these heritage events, and wanting to make more for myself.
That is quite a journey. I love that the order of your journey is falling in love with the heritage first and wanting to sew second. It was like you added the skill of sewing to meet this passion that you had in the heritage. So, and I understand that along the way that you have kind of researched and kind of gotten familiar with some of the apparel history that leads up to the period that you're most interested in, because you have picked a period in time. Is that right? That you are interested in learning what to make. So tell us a little bit about the apparel history that leads up to that time.
Yeah. So if you can imagine, probably when somebody mentions Native American tribes, you might have Pocahontas or something kind of stereotyped in your head. And truly, some of that did exist, or it did. We made traditional clothing up until about the late 1700s, early 1800s, out of animal bones and hides and furs and you know, plant fibers that we may have woven together, river grasses, things like that. So there absolutely was a period of even more traditional clothing. But the one that I'm focused on is about the late 1700s, early 1800s, more when we had that colonial French influence and started with cotton fabrics. You know, so it changed over about, like I said, about the early 1800s, but you'll find that our Mississippi, because we were transitioning from Mississippi to Oklahoma. And again, my tribe is the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, but there's also a Choctaw Nation of Mississippi. And those are the ones that stayed in Mississippi after we came to Oklahoma, but they were still wearing the very traditional clothing up until the 1960s. So, you know, they've actually been wonderful, because they maintained a lot of our culture that we lost coming to Oklahoma. We assimilated very quickly and changed our languages, our religion, our clothing, where the Mississippi tribe maintained a lot of our culture, and we rely on them a lot to go back and learn some of the traditional cooking, the traditional pottery, traditional clothing. So, you know, it's a very tight relationship. We are still one tribe, but again, they still wore the clothing until the 60s. So not that long ago.
Yeah.
So, and then there's two other fashions when we talk about the clothing. So the two fashions of clothing that, we mostly know about is our everyday traditional wear, which is really these cotton dresses that is very standard. And then you have more of our regalia that's used for social dancing, which is typically what you see in a powwow type environment, where they're wearing dresses that they call them jingle dresses because they have little jingles hanging from them. But it's more of the celebration. So my focus right now is mostly on the everyday traditional clothing.
I noticed on the picture you showed us that there's some consistent designs on several of those garments. So is there some symbolism or something that is traditional that has those repeating on various garments?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the things about Native American heritage, is that you'll find everything means something. The symbols that we use, the everything that we do has some sort of deeper meaning and connection with the earth and what it all means. So here's a couple of those, and you'll even notice here on my shirt that we've got some of the diamonds and the lines. And so what the Sorry, I need to get it to where I couldn't see myself on that one. So what the diamonds actually represent is the diamondback rattlesnake, which seems a little scary, right? But as a tribe, we actually respect the diamondback rattlesnake for all that it does to protect our gardens and keep the rodents out. We were an agricultural tribe, so we weren't we were more of hunting in our local areas. We didn't travel and follow the buffalo around the Great Plains. We traditionally, even before being colonized, we were an agricultural tribe that grew corn and grew beans and grew squash-like. They call it a sweet potato squash. It looks like a pumpkin. But so we grew our own food. But again, we respected everything, all the elements out in nature. And one of those was the diamondback rattlesnake. And we knew we were invading his environment when we came in. So we respected them. We respected turtles. Everything about nature. So again, the diamonds represent the diamondback rattlesnake. So even if you ever have a chance to come to our cultural center or to our headquarters, you'll see diamonds everywhere. So the other thing is a half diamond. And again, when I talk about these embellishments, it's usually what they do with the trim. And you'll notice maybe in some of the other pictures, or if you get a chance to explore out on Facebook, you'll see some different ones. But so this one is called the half diamond. So what's happening is these lines are the road of somebody's path that they take. And so if you were to do half diamonds up and down the road, it means you've gone down the road to help somebody who was sick and you came back up the road when they were well. So this is your journey of your life, that you're constructing the journey of your life onto your clothing. So one of the other ones is a circle. And again, these are my resources. Let me just point it out to you really quick. This is the Choctaw Music and Dance. And it is a book that I have done some research on to try to, again, learn what some of these mean, because again, I want to understand it. I don't want to just wear it. I want to know, and I want to be able to talk to it, and I want to feel it when I'm wearing it, that it means something. So this circle, so again, you would probably see circles instead of diamonds, or you might see the circles on the arms. What the circle means is basically the circle of life, that we don't want to gossip, because if you gossip, it'll come back around to you. So you have a circle of life that it reminds you not to gossip. So the last one is a cross, but not like a religious cross. It's a cross going this direction, an X really. And it means two things. One, may our paths cross again, but it also means that stickball, which is a traditional game that our men played, that instead of going to war, because we couldn't afford to lose men in a war, we would have these stickball games where the winner of the game basically won the war. So if there was an argument over land or an argument over something, they would play these and I say play, they're quite violent because there's no rules. It's football without padding. So they're very rough. So it was still a very, very tough game, but those often that X can represent where somebody would come in from their stickball game and hang their sticks up on the wall. So there's a lot of history and and description in the clothing that we wore.
Those symbols are so interesting, and the meaning behind the symbols is really interesting. I'm curious, have you personally tried to make some of those designs yourself?
I have. One of the elements that you do have to make is the diamonds and the bias tape. So you make yards and yards and yards of diamonds that are daisy chained together so that you can ultimately sew them in to the pattern. But, and again, I don't know if this will show, but you are cutting little 1 by 1 3/4 inches, and you're folding it into the shape of the diamond. And it seems simple enough, but you get about halfway down and realize you have squares instead of diamonds. So, and you have to iron each one. And And, you eventually get a little bit better where you're pinning them together. It takes lots of practice, but you'll think you're doing a great job. And then you'll look at one and you're like, no, those are all squares, not diamonds or trapezoids or some other shape that they're not supposed to be. So again, that's where I mentioned earlier that these shirts are quite expensive, but the effort that goes into making these perfect diamonds and then getting the bias tape perfectly lined up, again, our roads, as we would call them. But it just takes a lot of practice to get good at it.
Well, I know that you're so tenacious. I've already learned that about you. And so I know you'll get there if you're not there already. Well, when you and I were talking earlier, you mentioned that a lot of the stories of the Native American heritage have gone untold. And that was part of the challenge that you had in trying to develop your understanding of the apparel and how to make your own. So can you tell us a little bit more about how those stories got lost?
I can actually. So there's two significant reasons why those stories got lost. One, they're both significantly sad, but one of them is the assimilation policies of our federal government throughout the 1800s and the 1900s. They wanted to take the Native American tribes and, for a lack of a better word, they assimilated them into the European cultures, whether that's through the religion or through the language or through the clothing. So they would literally go through and take children above 5 years of age, bring them into schools, take them away from their parents. They weren't allowed to speak their language. They weren't allowed to wear their clothes. And they would be punished significantly if they showed any of their culture or heritage. So it literally was stripped from many, many, many of the children. So many of our elders refused to share the culture with their children and grandchildren because they didn't want them to have to go through potentially some of those challenges that they did when that culture was stripped from them. Wow. So the other thing is a lot of, and you may have read about some of this, but a lot of the pandemics of smallpox and flus and the Native tribes we weren't conditioned to those types of pandemics and such. My great grandparents both passed away in 1918 during the flu pandemic. And my grandmother, my Choctaw grandmother, was sent to go live with her non-Choctaw relatives. Granted, it's 5 miles away, but she wasn't brought up in that Choctaw heritage. And so traditionally, where you would expect to learn from your mother, who learned from her mother, who learned from their mother, I didn't get that experience. So I've had to literally hunt and peck and try to ask a lot of questions, attend a lot of events from the nation where somebody may be teaching some of these things. But again, it's almost like this oppression, like people are still just shy of wanting to share it openly with everybody. Mm-hmm. And I think we have this renaissance going on where we're starting to feel okay, like it's okay to talk about that and we're okay to share that. But the problem is none of it was documented. So because of not wanting to hang on to those heritages or the assimilation policies, there's very little documentation.
So most of what you've had to cobble together, you've had to actually talk to elders and what a blessing that there are still elders available to share their knowledge with you since it's not documented. And
I know.
You've had the opportunity to sit down with them and hear them talk about how they make this clothing and help enlighten you. And that is without that, where would you be?
I'll tell you one other struggle that exists. You have some elders who believe everything has to be very traditional. Like they want you to rip the cloth. They want you to hand sew everything. And I have to kind of ask myself, I wonder if that elder in 1910 would use a sewing machine and some scissors if they had been available, which I know sewing machines were available then. But the thing is like, I think they would have progressed. They would have taken on some of the modern technologies that were available to them. And trust me, I think that there is something core to your heart of doing it in a traditional style, ripping and hand sewing. And I think that, it's too much for somebody who's beginning like myself. But I think maybe 10 years from now, when I have more time and more effort and more experience, it may be a direction I want to go. So you've got those elders that unless you're doing it the traditional way, then you shouldn't be doing it. Yeah. But then you have the ones who are a little bit more accepting of, like I said, the one that I took the class from when I made this shirt. This is just a standard, I don't know, Simplicity or McCall's or something, pattern that has like a bell sleeve, and it's, do not look at, this was my very first thing to ever sew. I'm looking at it, oh my gosh.
It looks fantastic.
But, so, that they're okay with you taking a standard paper pattern and embellishing it. So I think it's a good step of bringing people to accepting, yes, we have our traditions, yes, we have our heritage, but it's 2020. We also need to bring it forward. It's okay to take a beautiful suit that fits like a 19 or a 2020 suit and put some diamonds on it, make it look more, put some of those traditional elements on it. So
that particular shirt, your first attempt on your own, you said you based that on one of the big four patterns. And I am interested, I think our viewers will be interested to hear you tell the story you told me about the pattern you got from talking to the elders. It's a little less traditional than a pattern that you get out of an envelope at Joann's.
Yeah, absolutely. Had this been what I got handed the first time I went into a class, I probably would have taken off and left because it's just so overwhelming, not knowing how to draft pattern pieces. But there have been a few elders that have tried to cobble together enough information that somebody with a good baseline of pattern drafting and sewing and construction could figure out how to do that. But somebody as myself who doesn't have all of those traditional skill sets have had to go in and learn them. So I provided you a copy of that PDF, and most of it's handwritten. And it's a lot of take your measurements, cut out a rectangle, do a U for the neck. It's stuff that, somebody that's a very experienced sewer would know how to divide up and quarter up different pieces of the pattern, whereas myself, I wouldn't understand how to do those. So anyway, it's been, and unfortunately, I made my shirt back in November of 2019 with the goal of there being a class making or a dressmaking class. Then, of course, the pandemic hit, so we've all kind of come to a screeching halt, but that's been good in some ways because it's let me take a step back and really absorb that the information that was provided from the elders, and then kind of go back and maybe take a pattern making class. And you'll find that it's just a long circle skirt or something along those lines. So I can learn from the information that was provided. And in all honesty, my goal would be to draft a digital pattern that maybe has some measurement coordinates on it that I can eventually publish and give to more of my fellow tribal members so that they have an opportunity to make these dresses themselves. It's different. It's not like I need to make a pattern and hoard it for myself so that nobody ever learns it. And sometimes I think there is a little bit of that with our elders. That's my recipe. I'm not going to give you my famous cookie recipe kind of thing. And whether it's, I don't think it's intentional by any means, but we all have the grandmother who doesn't want to share the recipe, and you may get it on the deathbed kind of thing. But, I'm hoping that I can open some more doors for some of my my generation of the tribal members, that we can learn how to make those and provide more traditional patterns or digital patterns so that they can make them.
Well, I think that you're just the person to do that. So
We'll see.
You definitely have. Yeah. So before we close, I want to just take a second to hear about a non-sewing part of your journey into your heritage. I understand that you've also been working to learn the language. So can you tell us just a little bit about that?
I have been learning. I spent 2 years now in our language classes, and not being I'm a numbers person, so languages don't come easily to me. And so it's been a challenge, but it's been so worthy because, again, it's another way to connect with my heritage. And as I mentioned before, it's imperative that we have tribal members that speak our language. Again, that identifies us with who we are and our culture and says we are a separate people group. We haven't just completely blended in with the rest of the people groups that are out there. So yeah, I've spent two years. I spend about 6 hours a week on it's very difficult. But let me see if I can think of a few things maybe to say. Chihololi is I love you. Chipinsalachiki is I'll see you later. Again, we don't traditionally say goodbye. We'll say I'll see you later. Let's
say that one again.
Chipinsalachiki.
Chipinsalachiki.
Yeah, good job. So, and again, because of the language not being some of the traditional things that I grew up hearing, like Spanish, growing up in Texas, I heard that a lot. I'm not used to some of the vowel sounds and some of the unique sounds that our language makes. So my tongue doesn't traditionally, I think whenever I try to speak to an elder, they're like, yeah, you got a lot of Southern drawl, Oklahoma in that speech. But yeah, it's been another way to connect. And I've really appreciated that the nation offers those classes to us.
Well, that is fantastic. I know that you'll progress in that as well. So, Debbie, thank you so much for joining me today and telling me about all of this. I've learned so much, and I'm sure that our viewers will learn so much also. We're really grateful to have you in our chapter, and I truly do look forward to watching you progress in this pursuit to make your culturally heritage apparel. And what a wonderful way to reflect on this as we reflect back on Native American Heritage Month. And I can't wait to see what comes next from your journey.
Wow, Sheryl, thank you so much for inviting me. I think, again, it's so important that we continue to educate people on every type of ethnic group that's out there, that we all respect each other, that we honor each other. I appreciate that you want to learn about who we are and what it means to us.
Well, I'm going to do my best effort to say farewell in Choctaw. So, Chipinsalachiki.
Very close. Chipinsalachiki. So again, those are nasalized L's or nasalized N's. They're difficult when you're not used to saying them, but Chipinsalachiki.
Chipinsalachiki. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.